A few clues to discover the next protagonist of Red. She's dressed in blue, has racing block graphics, and on the tank, a huge thirst for adventure and golden rims. In short, the essential ingredients to push yourself a little further. New engine, CP2, Euro 5 for those who haven't figured it out yet. We're talking about the new Yamaha Tenere 700 in the rally setup. Let's discover it on Red. First of all, it's important to mention how many technical innovations have arrived for 2025, both for the rally version we tested and for the standard version. Above all, there's the ride-by-wire throttle control, which brings with it two dedicated engine maps, Sport and Explore, along with traction control and ABS adjustable on 3 levels. In any case, for both versions, it's possible to completely deactivate them. The 16-liter fuel tank has also received attention, being repositioned to improve weight distribution, and the steel frame has been lightened to provide even clearer feedback during off-road riding. The rally version, in addition to the standard model, benefits from new suspension with increased travel. The 43mm diameter Kayaba fork, with 230mm of travel and Kashima coating to improve smoothness, is in my opinion the cornerstone of the project. It glides, absorbs, and works perfectly in tandem with the monoshock, which provides 220mm of rear-wheel travel. It should be emphasized that the suspension is fully adjustable and provides a ground clearance of 255mm, which is very high, and consequently also a seat height of 910mm. The CP2 twin-cylinder engine is an old friend, and it hasn't been penalized at all by the introduction of Euro 5+. It stays true to its character, enjoyable at low revs and capable of revving high. It's clear that the arrival of ride-by-wire has made it possible to have two mappings with two distinct characters, not polar opposites, but definitely noticeable. All these elements, as I was saying, allowed me during this test day. I covered about 300 kilometers in total, around 60 of which were off-road to fully appreciate off-road riding from every angle. Not just dirt roads, but also some single tracks where you can hop over a few embedded rocks without too much effort, always aided by the good character of the twin-cylinder engine at low revs. I'm happy to start by talking about the riding position, which has greatly improved now that so many updates have arrived, not just for the Tenere Rally, but for the Tenere in general. What do I find? First of all, during the initial transfer which we did on the Highway 2, get to the off-road terrain, the natural habitat of the Yamaha Tenere Rally, starting from the front, there's a new windshield, improved in every way, with a simpler profile and more than decent wind protection. We travel at 130 kilometers per hour on the highway. I like to point out that cruising at 130 kilometers per hour, the CP2 engine runs at 5,700 revolutions per minute, which results in very, very low fuel consumption and minimal vibrations, both at the handlebars and the foot pegs. Keep in mind that the white titanium foot pegs designed for off-road no longer have the rubber inserts, so they transmit a bit more vibration, but it's still absolutely minimal and more than tolerable. As I was saying, the riding position is very nice. Both when seated, in this case, the work done with the one-piece, single-level seat is comfortable. Keep in mind that the ride we did was 350 kilometers, both sitting and standing a lot, but basically we spent quite a bit of time with our seat on the saddle, and I have to say it offers good support. The padding holds up well, and even the width in this case isn't a drawback, especially when you're sitting. Great leg positioning, I really have to say the comfort level is very high, the handlebar is spot on, the ergonomics are excellent, and there's also decent wind protection from the windshield. Even with the crossover helmet we use today, you don't get air hitting directly on the sun visor, which actually makes every kind of trip much more comfortable. It gets even better when you stand up on the foot pegs, where you really understand the philosophy behind the project. I had already ridden the Tenere in the past, and I liked it in all its aspects throughout the years, starting from the first generation back in 2019, and I always have to acknowledge the great attention given, especially to riding while standing up. You can tell that the Tenere was born to be ridden off-road, designed specifically for this purpose, and many participants in the ever-growing number of motorly events are showing us that those who buy a Yamaha Tenere do so with the idea of a life far from the asphalt, just like I am here today. So, standing up on the foot pegs, the riding position is fantastic, and this is where the further change made to the bike structure really comes into play. I'm referring to the new fuel tank, which is slimmer and more tapered, allowing you to move forward much more easily when accelerating. The seat also allows for smooth movement when you brake hard, even going downhill on loose terrain with low grip. But the real difference is made by this whole area here, which is the clutch area. The new clutch housing, or rather the clutch cover, has been rotated forward by about 35 degrees, if I remember correctly, just enough to make it easier to position your leg when you need to stand on the foot pegs and basically when you need to operate the rear brake. On top of all this, and speaking as someone who isn't particularly tall, for an enduro rider, I'm 1.78 m, the seat height of 910 millimeters, which is also a result of the changes and the completely different lengthened suspension, with the 43 millimeter fork now offering 230 millimeters of travel and 220 millimeters of rear travel, has made the bike objectively very, very tall. What does that mean? It means that during low speed maneuvers or U-turns, I have to admit I sometimes had a bit of trouble, especially when we tackled off-road section. That said, at the heart of the journey, so among the new features I'm starting to tell you about and that I noticed starting from the riding position, I also find the completely redesigned area with electric switches, both on the right and left sides. It's very nice, very simple, extremely intuitive, and there's a beautiful vertical display that clearly recalls the African road books. It's all digital, very easy to read, intuitive to operate, demonstrating that the step forward that has been made is really, really significant. Still, in the instrument cluster area, on the left, there's a button to deactivate the AV switch along with the traction control. Must obviously be done while stationary, and on the right side, there's a very useful USB-C port for those who, in addition to the traditional navigation system or a phone mounted here on the handlebar, want to have power for any device. So the riding position is very good. There are two main areas where, in my opinion, the Yamaha Tenere Rally really stood out during this first test ride. And I'd like to start by talking about the chassis, specifically the 43 millimeter Kayaba fork with Kashima coating, a true object of desire for off-road enthusiasts. First of all, it's important to mention the suspension travel, 230 millimeters at the front, 220 millimeters at the rear, which is 20 millimeters more than the standard Tenere. I rarely go out of my way to praise the suspension, especially on an off-road bike, because let's be honest, my off-roading skills are more those of a Sunday enthusiast than a top-level champion. But I have to say that truly for the first time on a maxi bike, I found a fork and a shock absorber that, being very well tuned, really allowed me to do everything with incredible ease. The smoothness of the fork, its absorption capacity, riding comfort both on the road and off-road, I have to say that never before, as with the rally on this occasion, have I felt truly perfectly at ease. All of this is supported by a minimum ground clearance of 250 millimeters. The protection of the sump with the aluminum skid plate is a clear sign of its strong off-road intentions. However, what really stuck with me is the feeling that throughout this test I always had total control. That is, the suspension absorbs well, it squats nicely under braking, but then becomes increasingly supportive as you load it further. And it's also capable of handling small jumps when we had the chance to, let's say, get the wheels off the ground, even if, I repeat once again, it was all done in a very amateur way. That said, really, the feeling you get when you get on the bike and start riding is that as soon as you leave the asphalt by the way, even on the asphalt, when riding at a good pace, I have to say that the Pirelli Scorpion Rally STR tires are truly exceptional. They let you lean so far that the foot pegs literally touch the ground with a good extension during direction changes, so the suspension works and moves smoothly. But when you really move on to true off-road terrain, that's when the real soul of the rally comes out. Let me go a bit more in depth about the riding experience today, where we went from single tracks to some rather challenging dirt roads with loose rocks. The front end is stable and precise. It never loses its line, not even under acceleration. This good feeling also carries over to the rear, as you always get the sense of having solid grip on the ground. This is also thanks to the throttle management, which is another topic I'll address separately. But if I had to define the best feature I found today in this Tenere, it would definitely be the suspension setup and the overall riding dynamics, both on the road and off-road. Also, I almost forgot, when braking firmly, you have a dual 282mm front disc from Brembo and a nice big rear disc. So these are very useful features for off-road riding. With the ABS being switchable, either just at the rear or completely, you always have great control. So the front end continues to hold the line you have in mind and has never let me down in any situation, even when I gave it a bit more throttle and pushed the gears a little further. So there's great comfort from the suspension point of view. The third essential element in this review of the Yamaha Tenere 700 Rally is, of course, Yamaha CP2 engine, a parallel twin 682cc, 73 horsepower. I can gladly call it an old acquaintance because I've tested it on the Yamaha MT-07, on the Tracer 7, and several times on the Tenere 700 as well. For 2025, of course, ride-by-wire is coming, which also slightly changes the riding feel you get with it. What fundamentally changes? Well, the introduction of ride-by-wire technology, which does away with the cables that control the throttle, also brings with it the introduction of two riding modes: Explore and the more performance-oriented and interesting one, Sport. Explore is designed specifically for those who want to do amateur off-roading. By the way, I recommend you check out the feature in Morocco by our Simone Zaffaroni from the off-road division of Red called Get Dirt There Above. Is the link to watch it, where clearly his racing experience allows him to ride a bike like this like a true champion, which is definitely not the case for me. But it also helps to really understand the substantial difference between the two mappings, both Sport and Explore, and then the use of the various traction controls. Specifically, when I was riding off-road, I completely turned off the traction control because whether in Explore or Sport mode, its presence is always a bit intrusive, cautious, which is great for those new to off-roading. But for anyone with even just a little experience, not having the rear tire immediately start to slide can actually be a limitation. I mentioned turning off the rear ABS, but let's focus mainly on the engine. The engine, as I said at the beginning, has little vibration and is fuel efficient. We achieved some exceptional averages considered that during the highway transfer at around 125 to 130 kilometers per hour, we were below 3.7 liters per 100 kilometers, which is a very interesting figure. Very few vibrations are transmitted from the twin cylinder to the foot pegs and handlebars, as I mentioned, but it's really when you start riding it seriously that, once again, in my opinion, it surprises you on the road. That's because it's an engine that revs well beyond the indicated 9,500 revolutions per minute on the road. I think it's an engine that both off-road and during road transfers really has everything in the right place. In my considered opinion, the 73 horsepower is precisely the right amount of power, providing a truly pleasant and remarkably easy delivery of that power, especially at lower engine revs, which feels incredibly smooth and responsive. I remember that the previous Yamaha Tenere had a much quicker response at the very first twist of the throttle, that famous snap that enduro riders love so much. Here in the Explore mapping, it has been further softened. In other words, the distinction between the two mappings is very clear, which allows me and has allowed me to ride in complete safety, having fun without ever having any kind of problem managing the engine or the power, even at mid-range revs when the best torque value actually starts to kick in. The gearbox performs well, there's no quick shifter. Thinking about it, I believe it was a wise choice because the quick shifter is an extremely useful tool for road and track riding, very sensitive even to the slightest touch of the boot on the gear lever, and probably off-road it would have been a drawback since it's quite common to accidentally hit the lever. The gear shifts are precise, both up and down, maybe a bit noisy, but I can't really criticize it because from this point of view it's always been very precise and has never ever missed a gear. From the engine's perspective still, talking about the engine, I'd like to point out the clutch lever has no adjuster, so it's not adjustable, it's still cable operated, and in my opinion it's just a bit stiff to operate. I noticed this both during the brief moments we were moving through traffic and later when downshifting, trying to modulate slightly when exiting a curve or a dirt hairpin. In short, over time the clutch felt quite stiff to me. On the other hand, the controls are excellent since I'm talking about the handlebars. The two controls, both the one on the handlebars and the foot brake, are very easy to modulate, especially the front brake, which doesn't lock up when you're riding. overall, really good, positive sensations in every situation. ABS, since I mentioned the front brake, on the road there was no intervention at all, even when riding and braking hard, so a rather high level of performance quality. Off-road, only on a couple of occasions on very steep descents. When I was making a turn, the front wheel slipped just a little, creating a slight step that maybe for professionals could be annoying. But for them, there's the option to turn everything off and enjoy braking however they prefer. So even from this point of view, the engine proves itself once again to be an old classic. I repeat, maybe the enthusiast who loves that very first twist of the throttle off-road won't find that same feeling anymore, that pure soul the previous Tenere had. But in my opinion, for an average rider who wants to do some off-roading with a decent amount of experience and doesn't want to get stuck, maybe by avoiding the little obstacle and choosing a slightly more manageable route, they could really, really enjoy this bike. So we've reached the end of this very first test of the new Yamaha Tenere 700 Rally. I have to admit I'm saying goodbye to it with a bit of regret because beyond the nostalgia effect of its blue color, the yellow number plates, and the speed blocks on the tank that clearly recall the Tenere 600 from the 80s, the one with the big tank single cylinder with this bike, I really had a lot of fun. I've rediscovered the pleasure of riding maxi enduros off-road, and I've also rediscovered the joy of doing it the right way without taking risks, just having fun, accelerating and all that. First of all, a round of applause. Perhaps the most distinctive feature of this whole new project is definitely related to the suspension. A 43mm Kayaba fork with the exceptional Kashima coating, paired with a rear shock absorber featuring a new linkage completely redesigned and just as efficient, so the suspension system truly makes a difference. I never would have thought I could ride the new twin-cylinder from the Iwata company with such ease, supported by the CP2 engine 73 horsepower, which may not sound like much, but it all depends on who's twisting the throttle. For me, it's perfectly balanced, even in terms of weight, with its 210 kilograms, which overall makes it a truly excellent compromise. I really love the flat one-piece seat, which has a good grip. You can slide easily, but it holds you in place when you accelerate. I'd like to point out some technical and aesthetic features that are actually functional. The two side panels separated from the tail as opposed to the single-piece design of the past. And once again, the new windscreen, which works really, really well. So what else is there to say? Well, in a context where motor rally and adventuring are becoming more and more popular with so many players involved, I have to say that the Tenere Rally in this case is a step above the standard model. It really stands out for its exceptional riding quality. Thoughts on possible improvements? As I mentioned earlier, the clutch uses a non-adjustable cable mechanism and it's a bit stiff to operate. I would have preferred it to be a little softer and a bit closer to the grip, especially when you need to hold it and manage the engine during starts and restarts. The foot pegs are exceptionally amazing, both in terms of support and comfort. I'd also like to point out what I think is an important detail: the absence of a chain guide. In off-road riding, a chain guide is almost essential, and maybe it will be included in the next evolutionary step of this bike. When you're off-roading and you pass close to a rock, if you hit it, the chain and sprocket immediately react. So this is definitely something to seriously consider. And last but not least, the seat, 910 millimeters. Is it high? Is it not high? Is it just right? Is it wrong? Well, for me, during stationary maneuvers, it is high. I'm 1.78 m, just to remind you. When maneuvering at low speed while stationary, sometimes I prefer, especially on single tracks to turnarounds, so on narrow trails, to maneuver while standing next to the bike. But I have to admit, as soon as you move that first meter and the bike starts to dance over the rocks and bounce from side to side with an unexpected ease, well, this seat height actually becomes a useful element while riding. And the center of gravity, which has always been a bit of an issue with the Yamaha Tenere 700, because the engine sits high with the oil sump underneath, the tank up here, basically, all these elements together maybe make the high center of gravity a bit of a limitation. But in reality, when you're riding it, if you're well positioned on the foot pegs, it's really, really, really nice. I'll wrap it up here. If you have any questions, I'm available. If you want to talk about motor rally, I can even just learn from you if you have any adventure stories to share anything you want. See you in the next video. And the start this time was, of course, the Yamaha Tenere 700 Rally.